Thanks for the organizer, especially maybe Philippe. I must confess that I'm half interested in presenting here because I want to share stuff about those scratches, but the other half is I'm spying to learn how to do conference online because I'm going to organize some of them also during the summer. So I've been learning a lot through Philippe Bédard adventure. I'm also happy to be presenting after Irina because somehow maybe it relates. You talked about creating universe without boundaries, and this talk is all about interrupting the immersive experience, right? The apparition of a scratch breaks the relationship you have, the immersive relationship you have with a movie. And also, thanks for the excellent tea. So Scratch Odyssey, Cinema Hunting Dislocation. I'm not going to read a paper, I'm just going to tell you the story of the Scratch, the relationship with immersion, of course. And then at the end, I will simply raise a series of questions that have been hunting me since 2018. The reason of the conference also is to try to redeem the 3 months I spent completely obsessed with those Scratch during the summer of 2018. So I'm happy to finally be able to share those. So I'm gonna quickly just try to set the stories within the context of immersion, but those familiar with 2001 already knows the detail. Then I will talk about the scratches, but 15 minutes is really too short. If you Google scratches and Kubrick in Google or whatever search engine you're using, you should fall directly on the blog post where I documented those scratches for like about 10,000 words. There's GIF, animated GIF. So if you want to just Google Scratch and Kubrick, you should find all the information I will condense today in a dramatic way. So I'll be presenting facts about the scratches and then scratching our head, part one, and scratching our head a little bit more. Simply, again, questions. The first one, scratching our heads, question, like concrete question about the scratches, did Kubrick saw them, etc. But then moving to scratches number two, part two, we'll be asking more, maybe more question relating to media philosophy and phenomenology, and maybe open doors and path to us reflecting about what is it to experience a medium for itself instead of going through the medium and experiencing the representation or what is being represented. So the first part here, immersion. Everybody knows that Kubrick went in 1964 at the New York World's Fair, and he saw the movie To the Moon and Beyond in this dome-shaped theater, and he was quite impressed. He managed to hire some of the engineers who work on this, and he was inspired by this setting to come up with 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was shot in Super Panavision with a spherical lens, and it was meant to be presented in Cinerama. There was one, I don't know if it was the only one in Canada, but there was one Cinerama theater in Toronto. It was a Glendale. It was demolished in 1975, unfortunately. But of course, the Glendale in Toronto presented 2001 in full Cinerama, right? Full immersion, immersive experience. I read online that it was one of the places where a movie was presented for the longest time, about 127 consecutive weeks in Toronto. And there you get a little bit more advertisement about 2001: A Space Odyssey, and this idea of being inside the curved, you can see the curved screen there. Fast forward, that was 1968, if I'm not mistaken, the premiere of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Fast forward in December 2017, there's a new print. It's not the famous unrestored Nolan print. It was simply a new 70mm print presented at the TIFF at Toronto, and I had never saw 2001 in 70mm, so I went and saw that in December 2017. And then in June, it was a Saturday that the whole adventure started. The Saturday, June 9, 2018, the 70mm unrestored Christopher Nolan print, first presented at the Cannes Festival in 2018, was presented finally at the TIFF. And of course, I wanted to see the unrestored version. So I went to see the movie in June, and that's when I saw the scratches. So at some point, maybe during the discussion, I can explain how come did I saw the scratches, because they're really, really tiny and small. And then it's not exactly an accident or a coincidence. It has a lot to do with the fact, ironically, and we can discuss that as well, it has a lot to do with the fact that I had saw the film in December and I was bored because I knew everything was happening, right? I was not taken by the movie as much as when I rewatched it after maybe 2 years and I forgot about the body of Poole floating in the space. So I was watching other stuff on the screen because I knew the story very well. It was fresh in my mind. I think that's one of the explanation was why I was able to focus on other stuff than the main action. And finally, I was waiting for and hoping to see the same unrestored version, but this time in 15 perforation, full IMAX glory. And I had a chance to see it on August 31st, 2018, so like 2 months. But keep in mind, that's about 2-3 months after spending almost every day of the week just doing research about the scratches. So when I went there and bought my ticket and I went there, I was looking for only one thing, and I was looking to see if the scratches were still on the IMAX 70mm 15 perforation copy, because I spent 3 months trying to track the scratches on all possible copies, and I will explain a little bit what I'm talking about exactly. So that was the presentation of the what they call those would be super interesting questions to ask at the end, what is called the original experience. I think this is highly problematic, but we can talk about it. So the scratches, just for Zoom's sake, I'm avoiding using videos and GIFs, but online, if you go online, you can see I assemble some GIFs just to give you an idea. But there you have like the bright, and you can even see at the end, you can see the different layers of emulsion. You see a little bit of yellow and green. So that's one of the most visible one. Maybe the most obvious thing we should already make clear, and I'm watching the time, I think I still have 5 minutes, but I see André, so André, you can make signs. One thing that should be clear, when you're sitting in a theater and you're watching a movie and you see a scratch, usually you know the scratch is on the copy that is being projected behind you. That's how you experience a scratch. And I'm thinking about André because he published a very nice piece about the Q, right? The Q mark, that's something amazing. This time, though, I knew, as soon as I saw the scratch, I knew the scratch were not on the copy I was seeing because they were too confined within a screen within the screen, right? They were confined within the computer screen in the movie. And sitting there and seeing this, I realized that there was only one possible explanation. Those scratches were actually filmed during production in 1967 and 1968. Meaning, and it was astonishing to me, meaning those scratches we should be able to find them on absolutely all available copy of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I remember running home from the Cinesphere, coming home, telling my wife I discovered something amazing. And then I immediately started trying to find copies, torrenting copies of 2001, because there was one test, right? You download different copies of 2001, fast forward at the exact moment, and if the hypothesis is good, you will find the scratch. And that's the beginning of a long adventure, too much money spent on eBay. But I went through all different copies, and I've seen glorious VHS copy, cropped 4:3 of 2001. I've seen stuff I never saw before. So that's what I managed to do during the summer, to buy and resell different edition, and God knows there is a ton of edition, and I haven't seen all of them. I'm especially missing the Laserdisc edition. It becomes complicated. Even the VHS, I had to go back to the office to find a VHS player. The Laserdisc, I wouldn't even know how to do it. But this is what I was able to document. It's interesting to see, before we move forward, it's interesting to see that in some edition, so the hypothesis was verified. The scratches were filmed during production, of course, and they are on all copies. except for a few exceptions. And those exceptions can be explained easily. The VHS edition, which is crop 4:3, the ratio, it removes all the sides of the movie. Basically, you watch half of the movie when you watch that kind of edition, and the scratches are always on the side, so you don't see them. So that's one case where you won't see the scratch. And the second case, and it's still a mystery a little bit, the second case is the scratch were digitally erased on some edition. Okay, not consistently, but some edition they were erased. However, as you can see on the table there, they are present in the so-called unrestored edition, and I had confirmation from various colleagues that they are also present on the 4K Blu-ray edition released during the fall of 2018. So that could launch a whole different discussion for media scholar about the persistence of analog media within digital media, and it would be a discussion interesting in itself. I'm almost close to my the questions, the scratching our heads. One interesting thing, that's something else that came out of this research. It already exists actually in law. In law, there is something called media forensics. But in media studies and cinema studies, I haven't heard much about media forensics. And I want to point this fact out, because once you start studying the scratches, you can actually blindly identify any edition of 2001: A Space Odyssey. For a while, there was a copy available on the Internet Archive between 2016 and 2019 for free. It was not taken down, and it was a very nice quality. It was a DVD edition, of course. But knowing about the scratches, if you have studied the scratch carefully, you can actually tell exactly which DVD edition. It was the Warner Brother 2007 edition, I think, that was uploaded there. You don't need to have the factual information. You can just study the scratches and you can tell which edition you're watching. So that's something also interesting. The same way, and Andrea Beb is listening, the same way you can identify copy by the shape of the Q mark. I remember when I was a kid watching TQS and the public television in Quebec, and if you pay attention, you knew which copy of The Bad, the Good, and the Ugly was replaying constantly on TQS because you knew where the scratches were. That's something interesting. So few questions, and I'm done in like 1 minute. The Laserdisc, I don't know. I know there is one Laserdisc edition that was supervised by Kubrick, so it would be interesting to see if Kubrick actually saw the scratch. It's difficult to say if the scratch were visible at the premiere, but in all likelihood, yes. Then question for people doing restoration in cinema studies. What do you do about the scratches when you restored, right? The restored version, do you erase the scratch or do you keep the scratch? That's interesting. In analog cinema, the idea of original and authentic copy is a very, very strange idea. How can a copy be an original? The only way to actually watch the original copy would be to watch the original negative copy, and it's not meant to be watched at all. I mean, it's not a positive copy. And then this idea that cinema all starts with the negative. I haven't thought through all those things, but they are super interesting things for me. There's a difference between analog and digital, many differences. One of them is that the analog starts with a negative, start within the negative. And almost the last slide. Finally, we can ask maybe a more interesting and more towards the phenomenology of film scratch. What do you see when you see a scratch? You don't actually, is the scratch a thing itself? You don't see the scratch. What you see is an interruption of light in the midst of film where there should be film emulsion. Is a scratch a thing? We could ask the same question and then we would get an answer. If we ask, is a cut in a movie, right? A cut between two sequences, is a cut a thing in itself? Brillet, who was very much an influence on Deleuze, Brillet would tell us, no, a cut is not a thing. And maybe the scratch is not a thing either. Maybe the scratch is the sheer pure experience of the medium itself, right? Pure light. Just keeping in mind that the light, it's not pure light coming out of the scratch, it's the reflected light, and the light still go through the base, which should have been maybe acetate base in 1968. And that's about it for the scratch story. Thank you very much.